Me, my father is a federal marshal!
Tuesday afternoon. 2:17 in the evening. Terminal C, Denver International Airport. The fluorescent lights hum overhead the way they always do, indifferent to the chaos unfolding beneath them. Travelers stream past with carry-ons and boarding passes, locked into the tunnel vision of someone trying to catch a flight. None of them are paying attention to the two women standing near gate 37. Not yet. In about 90 seconds, every single person in this terminal is going to know exactly who they are. Officer Melissa Garrett had been working airport security detail for 3 years. Denver International is one of the busiest airports in the country, and the job has a particular rhythm to it. Most of the time it is crowd management, lost tourists, and the occasional confused traveler who wandered into the wrong terminal. Occasionally it escalates. Today was going to be one of those days. The call came over the radio at 2:14. Disturbance near gate 37. 2 female passengers had been removed from a gate area after a confrontation with airline staff. The passengers were refusing to leave the terminal. They were loud. They were aggressive. And one of them had allegedly made physical contact with a gate agent during the removal process. What Officer Garrett found when she arrived was not 2 frightened women who had made a mistake. It was 2 women who were absolutely certain, down to their bones, that they were the victims. The older one, tall, blonde, arms folded across her chest like armor, was mid-sentence when Garrett approached. She was telling everyone within earshot that her father was a retired federal marshal. That her sister had connections. That this entire situation was a violation of their rights and that heads were going to roll. Officer Garrett had heard this exact speech before. Many times. She had never once seen it work. If watching entitled passengers discover that an airport is not a place where family connections buy you a free pass is exactly the kind of content that keeps you coming back, hit that subscribe button right now. Like this video. Turn on notifications. Because what happens next is going to be the most satisfying thing you have watched all week. To understand how 2 women ended up in a screaming match with airport security in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, the story has to rewind approximately 2 hours, to the moment they checked in for their flight. The 2 sisters were traveling from Denver to Charlotte. The older one was 29 years old. Her name was Brittany. The younger one was 24. Her name was Kayla. They were dressed for a quick trip, not for the kind of day they were about to have. Kayla had a graduation ceremony the following morning. A nursing degree, earned over 5 grueling years at a state university. Brittany had driven up from Colorado Springs the night before to celebrate. They had dinner together. They had drinks. Several of them. And then they had more drinks at the airport bar before even getting close to the gate. The bartender at the terminal lounge served them without incident. That is not uncommon. Airport bars are built to move volume, not to act as the last line of defense against intoxicated travelers. The responsibility for that falls to the airline gate agents and the cabin crew, and the system is not perfect. People slip through regularly. What did not slip through the cracks was Kayla's behavior between the bar and the gate. She stumbled twice on the moving walkway. She knocked over a magazine rack near one of the newsstands. She laughed loudly and without any restraint at something Brittany said, drawing looks from at least a dozen nearby passengers. By the time the 2 of them reached gate 37, the gate agent on duty, a composed and experienced young man named Derek, had already flagged the situation internally. Derek was not looking for trouble. He was looking to do his job efficiently and get that plane boarded and pushed back on schedule. But when Kayla leaned heavily against the boarding podium and slurred a question about whether she could bring 2 oversized bags onto the cabin, Derek knew. The flight was not going to include these 2 passengers. Not today. Not on his watch. The conversation at the gate lasted less than 4 minutes, but it set the stage for everything that followed. Derek approached the sisters with the kind of calm, rehearsed professionalism that comes from doing this job day after day. He explained that based on their visible condition, airline policy combined with federal aviation safety regulations required him to deny them boarding. He was not making a judgment about their character. He was following the law. He offered to rebook them on a later flight, once they had had time to sober up. He offered water. He offered to contact ground services for further assistance. Brittany was the first to respond. She stepped forward immediately, positioning herself directly between Derek and Kayla like a wall, and demanded to know who had authorized this decision. Derek explained calmly that it was his responsibility as the gate agent on duty, and that the regulations backing his decision applied uniformly to every single passenger on every single flight out of this terminal. Brittany did not accept this. She asked for a supervisor. A supervisor arrived within 2 minutes. The supervisor repeated the exact same information Derek had already given them. The sisters were visibly impaired. They could not board. They would be rebooked on a later departure. This was not a conversation that was open for negotiation under any circumstances. That is the moment the dynamic shifted. Kayla, who had been silent up to that point, stepped out from behind her older sister and began crying. Not quietly. Loudly. She told the supervisor that she had a graduation the next morning. That her entire family was already waiting for her in Charlotte. That this was the single most important day of her entire life and they were destroying it. The emotion was real. The tears were genuine. But none of that changed the safety equation by even a fraction. Brittany watched her sister fall apart and something visibly hardened in her expression. She turned back to the supervisor and delivered a statement that Derek would later repeat to Officer Garrett almost word for word. She told him that her father was a retired federal marshal with over 25 years of service. That her brother was currently active duty law enforcement in another state. And that if the airline did not reverse this decision and let them board that plane, she was going to make sure everyone responsible understood exactly who they had just made enemies of. The supervisor did not flinch. He repeated the rebooking offer one final time. The sisters did not take it. The jet bridge had already been retracted by the time the sisters were escorted toward the main terminal. Derek had radioed for backup, and a second gate agent, a woman named Sandra, arrived to help manage the removal. Their job at this point was straightforward. Get the 2 passengers out of the gate area and into the open terminal corridor so the boarding process could resume without any further disruption to the other passengers. Brittany walked without any physical resistance. But her body language told an entirely different story. Her jaw was locked. Her shoulders were pulled back and squared. She was not leaving because she had accepted the decision. She was leaving because she was recalculating. She was running through options in her head, looking for the next angle, the next pressure point, the next way to flip the situation back in her favor. Kayla did not walk as smoothly. She stopped twice along the jet bridge corridor. Both times she turned around and looked back toward the gate, as though she might simply walk back and board the plane on her own. Sandra redirected her both times, keeping her voice calm and even, her hands visible and at her sides. No physical contact. No grabbing. Just verbal guidance and careful spatial management. This is exactly how airline staff are trained to handle situations like this. Avoid escalation at all costs. Avoid unnecessary physical contact. Move the passenger toward the exit through communication alone. They made it approximately 40 feet down the jet bridge corridor before the second confrontation ignited. Kayla stopped walking entirely. She planted her feet firmly on the carpeted floor and folded her arms across her chest and told Sandra in a voice that carried well past both of them that she was not going anywhere. That she had paid good money for this flight. That she had every legal right to be on that airplane. Sandra repeated the explanation one final time. The decision had been made. It was not going to change. Kayla needed to continue walking toward the terminal. Kayla did not continue walking. Instead she turned sharply toward Sandra and shoved her in the chest with both hands. Not a tap. Not an accidental brush. A deliberate, two-handed push with enough force to move Sandra back a full step. It did not need to be harder than that to be a crime. Under Colorado law, intentional physical contact that is meant to cause annoyance or injury qualifies as assault. Kayla had just crossed that line in front of security cameras and a witness. Sandra stumbled back but did not fall. She did not retaliate. She did not grab Kayla or shove her back or do anything other than stabilize herself and take one deliberate step further away from the suspect. This is the correct response, and it is significantly harder to execute in the moment than it appears from the outside. The human instinct when someone pushes you is to push back. Sandra suppressed that instinct entirely. She held her ground emotionally. She kept her body controlled. She did not give Kayla the reaction she was looking for. Brittany had been walking a few steps ahead. She heard the commotion behind her and turned around. She saw Sandra stumbling. She saw her sister standing there with her hands still extended from the force of the push. And in the space of approximately 2 seconds, Brittany made a decision that would define the entire rest of her evening. She walked directly back toward Sandra and shoved her a second time. This was not a reflexive act. It was not born from panic or confusion or the blurred judgment that comes with alcohol. This was a calculated, conscious choice. Brittany chose to insert her body into the conflict. She chose to escalate a single incident into a pattern. She chose to put her hands on an airline employee who was simply doing her job. 2 assaults. 2 suspects. Every second of it captured on corridor security cameras mounted at both ends of the jet bridge. Sandra did not fall. She backed up further, reached for her radio, and transmitted a clear and steady call for security. 2 female passengers. Physical contact with staff. Jet bridge corridor near gate 37. Immediate response requested. That radio transmission reached Officer Melissa Garrett's earpiece 45 seconds later. By the time Garrett arrived at the jet bridge entrance, both sisters had already moved back into the main terminal on their own. They were standing near the gate seating area. They were not running. They were not trying to hide. Brittany had her phone out and was talking into it. Kayla was crying again. And both of them were talking simultaneously, their voices layered on top of each other in a wall of overlapping noise that made it nearly impossible to pick out a single coherent sentence. Officer Garrett did not try to parse the noise yet. She did something more tactically important. She observed. She took in the body language. She noted the positions. She assessed the threat level in about 3 seconds. And then she moved in. The first thing Officer Garrett did when she reached the sisters was separate them. This is one of the most fundamental and most critical tactics in any multi-suspect encounter, and it is something every officer learns early in their career. When 2 people are operating as a unit, they reinforce each other constantly. They validate each other's version of events in real time. They mirror each other's emotional escalation. They feed off each other's energy. Splitting them apart removes that entire dynamic and forces each person to stand completely on their own, without a safety net. Garrett asked Brittany to step to her left, approximately 10 feet away, near a row of terminal benches along the wall. She asked Kayla to remain exactly where she was. She positioned a second officer, Officer Travis Cole, who had arrived moments after Garrett, close to Kayla to maintain visual contact and to prevent the sisters from coming back together until both had been spoken to individually and separately. Brittany did not comply right away. She told Garrett flatly that she was not going anywhere without her sister. Garrett explained, in a tone that was calm but carried absolutely no room for debate, that this was not a request she was making. It was a necessary component of the investigation that was now underway. Brittany stared at her. It was the kind of look designed to intimidate, to make the officer uncomfortable enough to back down. Garrett held her ground without so much as a shift in posture. After several long seconds, Brittany moved to the bench. She did it slowly. Deliberately. Every movement calculated to communicate how she felt about being told what to do without her actually having to say a single word out loud. Garrett turned her full attention to Kayla. The younger sister was still crying, though the quality of the tears had changed. Earlier at the gate they had been grief. Now they were closer to fury. Kayla's first words to Officer Garrett were not about what had happened on the jet bridge. They were about her graduation. She told Garrett that she was graduating the next morning. That she had worked for 5 years to earn her nursing degree. That her entire family had traveled to Charlotte to see her walk across that stage. And that if Garrett did not fix this situation immediately, she was going to ruin the most important day of Kayla's life. This is a psychological tactic that appears frequently in body cam encounters, and it is worth examining closely because it reveals something important about how entitled suspects process conflict. Kayla was not trying to explain what happened. She was not trying to provide context that might change the outcome. She was trying to reframe the entire interaction around her own emotional stakes. She wanted Garrett to see her not as a suspect in an assault, but as an innocent young woman on the eve of a life-changing milestone whose dreams were being crushed by an unjust system. The tactic has a name in behavioral analysis. It is called emotional leverage. The suspect identifies something the officer presumably cares about, in this case a young person's future, and uses it as a bargaining chip. The implicit message is clear. You would not destroy someone's life over something this small, would you? Surely you can see that I am not a bad person. Surely you understand that there must be another way. Officer Garrett understood exactly what was happening. She acknowledged Kayla's situation. She told her that she could hear how upset she was, and that she genuinely sympathized with the stress of a big day coming up. And then she told Kayla that none of that changed the fact that a complaint had been filed, that there were witnesses, and that she needed to get the facts of what happened on that jet bridge before anything else could move forward. Kayla's response to this was immediate and revealing. She stopped crying. The tears did not dry up gradually. They simply stopped, as though someone had turned off a faucet. And in their place came something much colder. With the tears gone, Kayla's demeanor shifted into a mode that Officer Garrett had seen dozens of times before in airport encounters. It was the mode of someone who had just realized that emotional manipulation was not going to work and had decided to switch to a different weapon entirely. The weapon was names. Kayla began listing connections the way someone might read off a resume. Her father was a retired federal marshal with over 2 decades of service. Her brother was a sitting law enforcement officer in another state. Her boyfriend was currently enrolled in a criminal justice program and had connections within the department. Her mother had volunteered for the Police Benevolent Association for 15 years. Each name and each title was delivered with the same underlying message. I am one of you. My family is one of you. You should be treating me differently because of who I come from. This is what behavioral analysts call vicarious authority. The suspect does not claim any personal status or power. Instead, she drapes herself in the authority of other people, people who are not present, people who cannot verify or contradict anything being said, and she hopes that the borrowed weight of those titles will be enough to make the officer hesitate. Officer Garrett did not hesitate. She listened to every name. She did not interrupt. She did not roll her eyes or dismiss what Kayla was saying. She simply let her finish. And then she said something that Kayla was clearly not expecting. Garrett told her that she respected anyone who served in law enforcement, in any capacity. And that because of that respect, she was going to hold Kayla to the same standard that any officer's family member would be held to. Which meant that the facts of what happened on that jet bridge needed to be addressed honestly and completely. No shortcuts. No special treatment. The same process. The same accountability. For everyone. It was a masterful piece of verbal judo. Garrett turned Kayla's own argument against her. You want to be treated like a cop's kid? Fine. Then act like one. Kayla did not have an answer for that. While Garrett continued to work Kayla, Officer Cole was handling Brittany on the other side of the terminal. Brittany's approach to the situation was different from her sister's but no less calculated. Where Kayla led with emotion and then pivoted to names, Brittany skipped the emotion entirely and went straight to intimidation. She told Cole that she already had her phone recording. She told him that she knew her rights. She told him that nothing that had happened on that jet bridge constituted any kind of criminal offense and that if he tried to arrest her or her sister, she was going to file a complaint with the airport authority, the airline, and every news outlet she could reach within the hour. Cole let her talk. This is another critical tactic. When a suspect is venting, the worst thing an officer can do is try to interrupt or argue. It accomplishes nothing except to make the suspect feel unheard, which makes them louder and more aggressive. The better approach is to let the energy burn itself out. Let them say everything they need to say. And then, once the tank is empty, move in with the facts. Brittany's tank took about 4 minutes to empty. When it did, Cole asked her a simple question. He asked her to describe, in her own words, exactly what happened between her and the gate agent on the jet bridge. Just the facts. Start to finish. What did she see? What did she do? In what order? Brittany's answer was immediate, and it was a masterpiece of self-serving revision. In her version, Sandra had been the aggressor from the very beginning. Sandra had grabbed Kayla's arm during the escort. Sandra had gotten in Kayla's face and threatened her. And when Brittany had stepped in to protect her sister, Sandra had stumbled on her own and then blamed Brittany for it. It was a clean, rehearsed narrative. And it was directly contradicted by every piece of evidence that existed. The evidence in this case was not complicated. It was, in fact, one of the more straightforward sets of facts that the officers had to work with that afternoon. And the reason it was straightforward is that the jet bridge at Denver International is one of the most heavily surveilled corridors in the entire terminal. Security cameras are mounted at both ends of every jet bridge, angled to capture the full length of the corridor from multiple perspectives. The footage from Gate 37 was pulled by the airport security supervisor within minutes of the incident being reported. Officer Garrett reviewed it before she had finished taking initial statements from either sister. The footage was unambiguous. It showed Sandra walking calmly behind both sisters during the escort. It showed Kayla stopping. It showed Kayla turning and pushing Sandra with both hands. It showed Sandra stumbling back and recovering without retaliating. It showed Brittany walking back from ahead in the corridor. And it showed Brittany pushing Sandra a second time with equal deliberateness. At no point in the footage did Sandra initiate any physical contact. At no point did she grab either sister's arm. At no point did she get in anyone's face or make any threatening gesture. The video told a story that was completely and utterly incompatible with the version Brittany had just given to Officer Cole. This is the moment in almost every bodycam case where the suspect's strategy collapses. They have spent the first 10 or 15 minutes building a narrative, constructing an alternative reality in which they are the victims and everyone else is lying. And then the evidence arrives and it does not care about their narrative at all. It simply exists. Cold. Objective. Indifferent to who anyone thinks they are or who their father used to be. Garrett had the footage. She had the witness statements from Derek and Sandra. She had two independent corroborating accounts from other gate agents who had observed portions of the altercation. The probable cause threshold was not just met. It was exceeded by a significant margin. Officer Garrett returned to Kayla with the intention of informing her that based on the evidence gathered, she was going to be placed under arrest for assault. Before she could deliver that information, Kayla spoke first. She told Garrett that she was having a panic attack. That she could not breathe properly. That she had a diagnosed anxiety disorder and that the stress of the situation was making it physically impossible for her to function. She pressed her hand against her chest and began breathing in short, shallow gasps that sounded genuinely distressed. This is one of the most common tactical pivots observed in airport and public venue arrests, and it is worth examining in detail. The suspect has just discovered that emotional leverage and name-dropping have both failed to produce the desired result. The next tool in the kit is medical distress. By claiming a health emergency, the suspect attempts to shift the entire frame of the interaction from a legal encounter to a medical one. The implicit demand is this: you cannot arrest someone who is having a panic attack. You have to stop and take care of me first. And if you do not, you are the bad guy. Officer Garrett responded exactly the way her training dictated. She told Kayla that she took her health concerns seriously. She radioed for EMS to respond and assess Kayla's condition. She told Kayla to sit down on the nearest bench and try to focus on slow, deep breaths. She did everything required to ensure the safety and well-being of the person in front of her. And then she waited. Because here is what every experienced officer knows about these situations. EMS arrives. They assess. If the medical complaint is genuine, treatment begins and the arrest is paused until the medical situation is resolved. If the complaint is not genuine, the paramedics clear the individual and the arrest proceeds exactly where it left off. The ambulance arrived in 6 minutes. The paramedic assessed Kayla for 4 minutes. And then the paramedic told Garrett that Kayla was medically cleared to be detained. The panic attack defense had not worked either. The handcuffs came out at the 22-minute mark of the encounter. Officer Garrett informed Kayla clearly and directly that she was being placed under arrest for assault in the second degree under Colorado law. She explained Kayla's rights. She asked Kayla to place her hands behind her back. Kayla did not comply. She did not refuse outright in words. Instead she went completely limp. Her legs buckled beneath her and she sat down hard on the terminal floor, dead weight, as though every bone in her body had simply dissolved at once. This is a resistance technique that suspects use when they have run out of every other option. It is called passive resistance. The logic behind it is simple. If I refuse to stand, you cannot walk me to the patrol vehicle. You will have to physically lift me. And if you physically lift me, it will look bad on the camera. Officer Garrett did not lift her. She did not grab her by the arms or haul her to her feet. Instead she knelt down to Kayla's level, keeping her voice measured and professional, and explained what was going to happen next in plain, simple terms. Kayla was going to be transported to the Denver Police Processing Center. She was going to be booked. She was going to have the opportunity to contact an attorney. The sooner she cooperated, the smoother and faster the process would be for everyone involved, including her. Kayla stared at the floor. She did not move. She did not speak. She simply sat there, her body a dead weight, forcing the officers to either wait her out or use additional force to get her moving. Garrett waited her out. She stayed in that kneeling position for nearly 90 seconds, maintaining eye contact, maintaining her calm tone, saying nothing beyond what she had already said. 90 seconds of absolute stillness on Garrett's part against Kayla's silent resistance. Kayla broke first. She stood up on her own. Brittany's arrest came next and it came fast. Officer Cole informed her of the charges. 2 counts of assault. 1 count for the shove on the jet bridge and 1 additional count for the interference and physical contact during the altercation. Brittany's reaction was markedly different from her sister's. She did not cry. She did not go limp. She did not claim a medical emergency. Instead she laughed. A short, sharp burst of laughter that carried through the terminal and drew looks from at least a dozen bystanders who had been watching the unfolding scene with open curiosity. Then she demanded to know on what basis she was being arrested. Cole explained the charges. He explained the evidence. He told her clearly that the jet bridge footage had been reviewed and that it showed both sisters initiating physical contact with the gate agent. Brittany's laugh died immediately when Cole said the word footage. This is the single most important moment in the entire encounter from a psychological perspective. Up to this point, Brittany had been operating on the assumption, whether conscious or not, that the situation was her word against Sandra's. That it came down to who the officers believed. That the name-dropping and the implied connections and the threat of complaints might be enough to tip the scales in her favor. The existence of unambiguous video footage eliminated every single one of those strategies in one sentence. Brittany did not argue about the footage. She did not ask to see it. She did not claim it showed something different from what Cole described. She simply stopped talking. Her arms dropped to her sides. Her jaw unclenched. And for approximately 5 seconds, her face wore an expression that was almost impossible to fake. It was the expression of someone doing rapid math and discovering that every number comes back wrong. Then the mask went back on. But it was not the same mask as before. As the handcuffs went on Brittany, the dynamic between the 2 sisters shifted in a way that was painful to watch and revealing to analyze. Until this point they had been operating as a team. Brittany had been the enforcer, the one who did the talking, the one who made the threats and issued the demands. Kayla had been the sympathetic figure, the one crying about graduation, the one claiming anxiety. But now both of them were in handcuffs. The team structure was gone. And what emerged in its place was something much uglier. Brittany turned to Kayla and told her, loud enough for both officers to hear, that this was her fault. That if Kayla had not pushed Sandra first, none of this would have happened. That Brittany had stepped in to protect her and now they were both going to jail because of it. The statement was delivered not with concern for her sister but with the kind of cold, accusatory tone that suggested Brittany was already building a defense strategy in her head, one in which Kayla was the liability and Brittany was the unfortunate bystander who got dragged down. Kayla's response was immediate and explosive. She told Brittany that she had pushed Sandra because Brittany had told her to stand her ground. That Brittany had been the one egging her on the entire time at the gate. That none of this would have happened if Brittany had just let them get rebooked quietly in the first place. Officer Garrett watched this exchange without intervening. She did not need to. The sisters were doing her job for her. In the space of 30 seconds, they had publicly contradicted each other's version of events, each one placing the blame squarely on the other. It was, from an evidentiary standpoint, extraordinarily useful. And from a human standpoint, it was one of the saddest things either officer had witnessed all week. The walk from the gate area to the security processing station took approximately 8 minutes. During that walk, the sisters went through a cycle of emotional states that moved so quickly it was almost dizzying to observe. First anger, directed at each other. Then anger directed at the officers. Then a brief window of something that looked almost like remorse, though it was hard to tell whether it was genuine regret for what they had done or simply regret that they had gotten caught. Then fear. And finally, a kind of hollow silence that settled over both of them like fog. It was during this silent stretch that Kayla said something to Officer Garrett that stood out. She was not crying when she said it. She was not performing or demanding or threatening. She simply said, very quietly, that she did not understand why this was happening. That she had not done anything wrong. That all she wanted was to go home and get ready for her graduation. Garrett responded with something that was both honest and kind. She told Kayla that she understood this was not how she had imagined her evening going. And she told her that the reason it was going this way was because physical contact had been made with an employee, it had been captured on camera, and there were multiple witnesses. She was not there to judge Kayla as a person. She was there to process what had happened. And what had happened was clear. It was a moment of genuine human connection in the middle of an arrest, and it was handled with exactly the right balance of empathy and accountability. Garrett did not sugarcoat the situation. But she also did not treat Kayla as though she were something less than a person. She treated her as someone who had made a bad decision on a bad night and was now going to face the consequences of it. Nothing more. Nothing less. The processing at the Denver police station was handled with standard efficiency. Both sisters were booked. Photographs taken. Fingerprints rolled. Personal belongings inventoried and sealed. The entire procedure moved quickly and without any additional incidents. During the booking process, Brittany made one request that was notable. She asked whether the charges could be dropped if Sandra agreed not to press charges. The booking officer explained that in Colorado, the decision to prosecute assault cases does not rest solely with the individual victim. The district attorney's office makes that determination based on the evidence and the totality of the circumstances. Sandra's personal preference was a factor that might be considered, but it was not the deciding factor. Brittany absorbed this information quietly. She did not argue. She did not make threats. The fight had gone out of her somewhere between the gate area and the processing room, replaced by the kind of calculating stillness that suggests someone is already thinking about damage control. Kayla's booking was more emotional. She cried again during the photograph. She asked repeatedly whether someone could call her mother. She told the booking officer that her family did not know where she was, that they were waiting at the Charlotte airport, and that someone needed to tell them what was happening before they panicked. The booking officer made a note of the emergency contact information and ensured it would be relayed. It was a small act of basic human decency in the middle of a bureaucratic process, and Kayla thanked her for it with a sincerity that suggested, for the first time all evening, that the real person underneath all the posturing and the tears and the name-dropping might actually be someone worth feeling sorry for. The legal framework surrounding this case is worth examining in detail because it illustrates precisely why the tactics the sisters employed were never going to work, no matter how loudly or how persistently they deployed them. Under Colorado revised statutes, assault in the second degree covers any knowing or intentional act that causes bodily injury or that places another person in a position of imminent danger of sustaining bodily injury. The statute does not require that serious harm actually occur. A push. A shove. A forceful physical contact initiated with intent. That is sufficient. The law draws the line at the moment of contact, not at the severity of the injury. The sisters' defense strategy, constructed in real time during the encounter, rested on 3 pillars. The first was emotional leverage. Kayla's graduation. Her future. Her anxiety. None of these factors constitute a legal defense to assault in any jurisdiction in the United States. Sympathy is not a shield. The second pillar was name-dropping and implied connections. The retired federal marshal father. The law enforcement brother. The boyfriend in criminal justice. In the state of Colorado, knowing someone in law enforcement does not exempt you from criminal liability. There is no provision in the statute, in case law, or in any prosecutorial guideline that grants preferential treatment based on familial association with officers. The third pillar was the claim that Sandra had been the aggressor. This was the only pillar that might have carried any weight if it had been true. But it was not true. The video proved it was not true. And once the video existed, that pillar was gone. The sisters had no viable defense. They had no mitigating circumstances that would change the outcome. They had no leverage that extended beyond the conversation they were having with the officers. The moment they left that terminal, every name they had dropped, every connection they had invoked, every threat they had made, all of it evaporated. It meant nothing inside a courtroom. It meant nothing in a prosecutor's office. It meant nothing anywhere that actually mattered. The broader pattern visible in this case extends far beyond two sisters at an airport on a Tuesday afternoon. It is a pattern that appears with remarkable consistency across body cam footage from airports, bars, restaurants, and public venues all over the country. And it follows an almost predictable sequence every single time. The suspect encounters a rule they do not want to follow. The rule is enforced by someone with the authority to enforce it. The suspect's first response is to challenge that authority verbally. When verbal challenge fails, the suspect escalates to physical contact, believing that the force of their personality or the force of their body will accomplish what words could not. When physical contact results in the involvement of law enforcement, the suspect pivots to emotional manipulation, attempting to reframe themselves as the victim. When emotional manipulation fails, they pivot to name-dropping and implied connections, hoping that social pressure will make the officer hesitate. When that fails, they claim medical distress. When that fails, they resort to physical resistance. And when physical resistance fails, which it always does, they are left with nothing but the consequences of every choice they made along the way. Brittany and Kayla followed this sequence almost textbook perfectly. At no point did either of them step back and ask the one question that might have changed everything. That question was this: what if I am wrong? What if the gate agent was right? What if the rules apply to me the same way they apply to everyone else? That question never occurred to them. Or if it did, they dismissed it immediately. Because in the world they had built around themselves, the world where their father's badge and their brother's uniform and their own sense of entitlement formed an invisible shield, that question simply did not compute. They had never been told no by someone whose no actually stuck. Until Tuesday afternoon in Terminal C. The aftermath of the arrest unfolded over the following weeks in ways that carried consequences far beyond the night itself. Both sisters were released on bail within hours of being booked. Neither was held overnight. The charges, however, remained active and were referred to the Denver District Attorney's Office for charging decisions. Sandra, the gate agent who had been shoved twice, provided a written statement to the investigating detective 3 days after the incident. Her account was consistent with everything she had said at the scene and consistent with the video footage. She described the encounter without embellishment or emotion. She noted that she had attempted to de-escalate the situation at every possible point. She noted that she had not initiated any physical contact at any time. And she noted that in her years working as a gate agent, physical assaults by passengers, while not common, were not rare enough to be shocking. Sandra also made a statement that spoke to something larger than the legal case. She said that the hardest part of working in aviation was not the long hours or the difficult schedules. It was the assumption, shared by a significant number of passengers, that airline employees were interchangeable service workers who did not deserve the same basic respect that any other person deserved. That when a gate agent enforced a policy, they were not doing so out of spite or indifference. They were doing so because the law required it and because the safety of everyone on that aircraft depended on it. Derek corroborated Sandra's account entirely. He also noted that in the weeks following the incident, the airline implemented an additional training module for gate agents on how to handle physical confrontations during passenger removals. The training emphasized de-escalation above all else, but it also made clear that gate agents had the right and the obligation to report any physical contact to law enforcement immediately when it occurred. The video footage was preserved and catalogued as evidence. It was not going anywhere. Brittany and Kayla appeared in Denver County Court 11 days after their arrest. Both entered not guilty pleas. Both retained attorneys. The case was scheduled for further proceedings, and at the time this account was compiled, it had not yet gone to trial. But the trajectory of the case was unmistakable. The evidence was clean. The witnesses were consistent. The video was unambiguous. And the suspects had provided, through their own words and their own behavior at the scene, a roadmap of every defense strategy they might raise, each one already dismantled by the facts that existed before either of them ever opened their mouths. Kayla's graduation did take place the following morning in Charlotte. Her family was there. Her mother had been contacted by the processing officer the night before and had driven to Charlotte from another state to make it happen. Kayla walked across that stage and received her nursing diploma. She posted about it on social media that afternoon. The posts made no mention of what had happened in Denver the day before. They made no mention of the arrest. They made no mention of the assault charges that were still pending in a Colorado courtroom. That silence tells its own story. It is the silence of someone who knows, now, that the version of herself she presents to the world and the version of herself that exists in a Denver police report are two very different people. Whether she will ever reconcile those two versions is something only time will answer. But the record exists. The footage exists. The witnesses exist. And no amount of name-dropping or graduation ceremonies or family connections is going to make any of it disappear. So here is the question that should stay with you long after this story ends. At what exact point do you believe Brittany realized that the jet bridge cameras had captured everything? Was it the moment Cole mentioned the footage and her laugh stopped dead in its tracks? Was it when she stopped arguing entirely and went silent? Or was it later, sitting in the back of the transport vehicle next to her sister, when the two of them turned on each other and started blaming each other for something they had both chosen to do together? Let me know your thoughts in the comment. Do remember to hit the subscribe button, like and share this story, and I'll see you in the next one.